Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and this video comes on the coattails and a little bit overdue from a video I put up talking about Star Trek Discovery, which I will link in the description below if you want to check that out separately, that video separate to this, where I was begging the question, was Star Trek Discovery meant to be set within the Prime timeline or the Kelvin verse, the Kelvin timeline, the J.J. Abrams movies, aesthetic, and everything like that. And I went on at length about describing the fact that I thought it was meant to be Prime, canon timeline, but that the aesthetics, the visuals, were updated to conform more along the lines of what we saw in the J.J. Abrams films, Star Trek 2009, Star Trek Into Darkness, and Star Trek Beyond, respectively, that they were working backward from those aesthetics to bring about the look and the feel and the vibe, the visual flair, if you will, of Star Trek Discovery. And I could take or leave that. I'd much prefer a series that was more conforming to the actual timeline aesthetically that it's supposed to fall into place in, which is the Cage era of Star Trek, the original series, the unaired original filmed pilot with Captain Christopher Pike as the captain of the Enterprise. Spock was part of the bridge crew. You had number one as the second officer, first officer, whatever you want to call it. And, like something more conforming to those aesthetics, but modernized, is the way this all ought to be shaping up as far as the way Discovery is meant to look. And but subsequent to that discussion and seeing other people's reactions, not only in the comments on that video, but as well as videos that other channels had put up discussing the various surrounding topics to where exactly Discovery falls into place, I came about to this other sort of revelation that I wanted to talk about herein, and that is what I think Star Trek Discovery actually may be. I do still adhere to the idea that it is set within the Prime timeline, Prime canon timeline, stemming off from the original series, but I've begun to adapt to this idea. If we go back to the first initial images of what the Discovery is meant to look like, it was very much hearkening back to the concept art that Ralph McQuarrie had done in sort of, pre-production on Star Trek Phase 2. Now, Phase 2, for those who don't know, was a short-lived in the planning stages, and I mean, they were even constructing the ship models and everything like that. It was a proposed 1970s sequel TV series to the original Star Trek that would eventually be scrapped in lieu of the motion picture, the very first Star Trek feature film. And some of those aspects and aesthetics would carry over into the motion picture. Some of them would be completely eschewed and gone away with. But it was always an interesting chapter in Star Trek production history, at least as far as I'm concerned. And then we got the debut of the, air quotes, what are being purported to be the Shenzhou's transporter room. And I was immediately reminded of the 1960s, I think it was TV show, The Time Tunnel, which I even made a Facebook post about. I had taken a picture from the Entertainment Weekly or whatever it was article of the brand new Shenzhou transporter room and put it right alongside a screen cap of an old episode of Time Tunnel with the big Time Tunnel works and everything, and said, "Oh, hey, look, it's Starfleet's new Time Tunnel," or transporter room. And as well as I've heard other people talking about, which my being a humongous fan of the George Pal 1960s Time Machine film, the sort of rotor on the back of the Time Machine as seen in that film, it kind of has aesthetics beholden to that as well, this new transporter room. And we're only led to assume it's the Shenzhou because that's the only ship we've seen thus far in all of the, preview work and everything like that. But I wanted to talk about why I'm beginning to evolve into that mindset that this is kind of, what Star Trek Discovery is kind of going to be, is like a sequel series to the original series of Star Trek, but modernized, stemming off of what Star Trek Phase 2 was potentially going to be, using a lot of its concept art, using a lot of that as inspiration, and even down to the way the Klingons were designed and everything, ahead of the motion picture as part of the Phase 2 project at the time. And so to sort of talk about this with a sort of visual aid, I've brought out my hardback The Art of Star Trek by Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens. And so if we look at some of the initial concept art of the Enterprise or other Starfleet vehicle, engine rooms for the time period of when Phase 2 was being put into production, it's very interesting. It's very retro-futuristic. It harkens back to me, definitely the sort of visual aesthetics of the Shenzhou's purported transporter room. I mean, right there, you've got the blacks and the yellows, the contrasting colors, very 70s disco vibe and everything. Looking at some of the other concept art, it's very 70s retro-futuristic disco. Another version of the transporter room, different communal areas aboard the Starfleet vessel in question and all that kind of stuff. It's all right in this book. And then if we're moving on to the actual pre-constructed sort of model work, the test phase model work of what the vehicle, the ship for Phase 2 would have looked like, based on Ralph McQuarrie's art, they have, of course, the concept art itself, which is featured in this book, as well as a couple of model works, patchworks that they put together just to sort of test out the framework of what this vehicle would look like. And it is very much conforming to what we saw in the earliest, sort of production teasers and things of that sort that Discovery was putting out. And then, of course, there is the commentary you hear a lot of people sort of bashing and reacting negatively to about the bridge design. Of course, a lot of the coloring and the aesthetics is very much more so sort of a marriage between Star Trek Enterprise's bridge design, the color motifs, especially down to the uniforms and everything. But if you look at some of the early Star Trek The Next Generation concept art for the design of the bridge as is showcased in this novel, in this book, you'll see that the bridge features a wraparound sort of, panoramic window where the view screen would normally be. And that's something that's been a problem for a lot of people in looking at Star Trek 2009 and all the movies set within that Kelvin timeline, as well as the Shenzhou, which is really the only ship we see thus far in all of the, Discovery production teasers and things like that, the officially released materials. But it's right there. It's something that goes back to the past of pre-production on a Star Trek project. And so, yeah, if nothing else, I hope that I've at least made those of you out there who are not as familiar with the production history of Star Trek that much more aware of what exactly I'm talking about. Even as I said, going back to the designs of the Klingons, the way the Klingons were designed in the pre-production of Phase 2 in the motion picture, how they would eventually look in the motion picture, how they've subsequently come to look in the 2009 Kelvin timeline films, it's directly back related to this book. And really, you need to look no further than all of the stuff I've shown and showcased in this video to really be able to wrap your mind around the idea that what Star Trek Discovery may in fact be is a prime timeline, a canon, sequel to the original series, what it might have looked like in the 1970s. That, to me, is that much more engrossing and compelling and exciting. It actually leaves me palpably, conservatively excited to see what they are going to end up doing in Star Trek Discovery. That so much of that harkens back to the past and what might have been. It's kind of like a Marvel What If comic book issue, but it's to do with Star Trek, and that could be pretty freaking phenomenal, if you ask me. At the end of the day, I think it could be. Of course, I'm going to be tentatively anticipating the series and see what they do with it, and time will tell if the writing is there, the character drama is there, the social, socio-political commentary, the allegory, if all of that is there as well, that Star Trek is so well known for. Time will tell. It remains to be seen. But at least the look and the design of the series feels like it is tried and true Star Trek, because it's part of the foundations of so many of those, preliminary concepts and designs, only now it's actually being put into practice. And I couldn't actually be more excited for that. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you think of my most recent line of theorizing as to where exactly Discovery is meant to fit into the whole grand franchise that is the Star Trek franchise, multi-generational though it may be. Do you think it actually does conform back to a sort of modern equivalent 1970s Phase 2 aesthetic? Or am I just waxing fanatical and making absolutely no sense, trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense at all? Anything goes in the comments below, as long as we have a respectable conversation about it. And otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. If this video finds you well, I'll catch you all later. Peace.